Welcome to the Anxious Child Podcast, the podcast that helps you best work with anxious kids and teens. Now, here's your host, Stephen Quinlan.
Hey everyone, today on the show we have a very special guest, Wade Lightheart. Wade is a 3-time Canadian natural bodybuilding champion and is one of the world's premier authorities on natural nutrition and training methods. Wade is also the co-founders of Bioptimizers, which is one of the sponsors of this podcast. He is a fountain of knowledge around nutrition and optimizing performance. And today on the show, we talk about how nutrition relates to anxiety and mental health in general. There's a ton of information in this episode, but there's also a great overall takeaway message, which really helps to narrow it down to some straightforward and basic steps that you can take to improve your overall nutrition and well-being. I'm really excited to have Wade on the show, and as in some previous episodes, not all the tips here may be necessarily applicable to children, but they certainly apply to anyone who works with kids and anyone who wants to just improve their mental health in general. Really quick, before we jump into the show, I have some exciting news, and I wanted to give a shout out to Meg Kelly, who is our new associate producer on the podcast. Meg's energy and enthusiasm have already helped to streamline a lot of the process, and she's helping me reach out to some really big name and exciting guests, and we're hopeful that we're going to have them on the show soon. So welcome, Meg. Okay, let's dive right into the show. Here is me, an all-natural bodybuilding champion, advisor to the American Anti-Cancer Institute, and author of several best-selling books, Wade Lightheart. Enjoy.
How's life?
Not bad. How are you?
Wait, things are good. Where are you calling in from?
Right now I'm in New Hampshire, which is where my practice is based out of. How about yourself?
I'm in Venice Beach, California, but I'm originally, you grew up in the New Brunswick area, so not far from where you guys are at.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, that's a little ways up north, but yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm really excited to just sit down and talk with you about mental health and nutrition and kind of how all those things overlap and what some of those connections are there. But if you want to just kind of take it back a little ways, let us know how you got interested in doing what you're doing and kind of how you got to where you are at the moment.
Sure. Born in Toronto, Canada, but moved out of there when I was a small boy at 5 and went down to the east coast of Canada. Lived in a little small town, played hockey, did all the normal things that kids do. And then when I was 15, big thing happened. My parents moved to be the caretakers of a private resort, which was a beautiful remote area, 5 miles on a dirt road to my nearest neighbor. Telephone poles ended at my door. So I had a lot of time to sit, think, contemplate at 15. Wasn't happy about that. My sister was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease at the same time.
Oh,
and
nice.
I watched her go through the medical model over 4 years before she died at the age of 22. So it really impacted me in the standpoint is that your health wasn't a guarantee and your life wasn't a guarantee. And so I thought, well, what can I do about that?
Wow.
And she gave me a bodybuilding magazine. It was a Muscle and Fitness with Troy Zuclato on the cover, 2 pretty girls in bikinis. And he had all these muscles and, but I was like, wow, maybe I get that. So I went and built a gym in my garage and started working out and discovered Arnold Schwarzenegger in his book, Education of a Bodybuilder. And in that book, he outlined 3 things that changed my life. Number 1, he said you could achieve anything you wanted in life if you had hard work, self-discipline, and a positive attitude. Well, everybody I knew around me worked really hard. It was woods, it was fishermen, it was labor. It was, I was literally caretaking and hauling stones and digging ditches and cutting trees and running bulldozers and graders and heavy equipment and weed eaters and power saws. And it was hard, dangerous, and challenging work. And virtually everybody did. But nobody had a positive attitude and no one knew anything about self-discipline. And so these concepts resonated with me. Of course, he was at the time the highest paid actor in the world, a multiple Mr. Universe, Mr. Olympia kind of guy, larger than life character that was living in California in this dream life. And I dreamed of having that too. So I followed that, kept training, went to exercise physiology at the University of New Brunswick. got a background in, I think, in the sciences of exercise and nutrition and biology, was disappointed with the overall culture of university, and that it asked more questions than answered things, and there was no unified theory of functionality. And so when I left, I embarked on a career throughout the fitness industry and sought out mentors who were performing results that I wanted. Worked at every stage as both an athlete, a representative. I managed a gym, ran nutrition stores, eventually owning and operating my own and being one of the Who's trainer in Vancouver, Canada. Concordantly, I hired a coach, the best bodybuilding coach in the world, Scott Abel, and developed my physique well enough that I won several Mr. Canada titles and competed for my country at the Mr. Universe, even though I have no business being in bodybuilding contests. I didn't have the genetics for it, but I had the drive, I had the coaching, and I had the above the shoulders part, not the below the shoulders part.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And I did it as a vegetarian. I also got integrated during a period of time into Eastern philosophy, meditation. That's when I went plant-based, and my career took off both professionally and athletic-wise when I embraced those concepts. And then that led, after the Mr. Universe, I had a major crisis physically, which turned me on to a guy by the name of Dr. Michael O'Brien, who helped me teach me about the digestive system, the role of enzymes and probiotics and functionality of the body, mineralization, amino acid uptake, how to radically transform your health and vitality, which I did. And we started a little company in 2004 that led to the development of what we know now today as BiOptimizer, a health optimization company, which is now a multi-million-dollar international endeavor, helping people live to a healthy 100 and beyond.
Wow, that's amazing. What was going on for you physically at that point where you had kind of that, it sounds like a sort of a seminal moment there where you had to really, I guess, dig deeper into all the things that you're doing now? What was the health crisis?
Yeah. So when I endeavored to go to the Mr. Universe without using drugs and being a vegetarian, that was everybody told me that wasn't possible. Mm-hmm. And under the guidance of my coach, no one had done that. So we were trying to adopt what would be, quote unquote, a meat eating mentality to a plant-based diet, which forced me into using, I think, too much processed foods, and particularly amino acids in the form of whey protein, because we did a lacto diet. There was no plant-based proteins or anything like that. Any measure. Mm-hmm. And that led to digestive distress. I gained 42 pounds of fat and water in 11 weeks after the Mr. Universe. I went from Mr. Universe to Mr. Marshmallow.
Wow.
And so that was like, oh, well, how did this happen? I got the best coach. I've been recognized internationally as the aesthetic idea. I'm extremely fit, but I'm obviously not healthy. And that's when Dr. O'Brien kind of schooled me in how to build the body from the inside out instead of the outside in. And from that, I was able to transform my physique, got my physique back in 6 weeks. I got a new level of energy and vitality. My sleep dropped. I felt amazing. Inflammatory responses, the achy in my joints that was concordant with high professional, athleticism at that sport, that all went away. Brain fog in the morning went away. A new zest and vitality in my life. My meditation got better. And then I perfected that, coaching Matt and I over 15,000 people over the next 4 years to kind of optimize those programs on a plant-based diet for athletics. And then I came back and won 2 more titles on a raw food diet, national titles, and went to the world's place better. And then promptly retired again because I was like, okay, now we've got a model that works. Now can I take it to the world and apply it in other areas?
I see. It's interesting. I had one of the questions down that I wanted to ask you about, and we could jump to it now. And I want to get into the sort of the mental health side of things as well. But as someone who is a vegetarian myself and have been for a couple of years, and also, do some athletic endeavors, not at that level, but I'm curious about how you feel like the plant-based diet can affect things like mental health, particularly in regards to, I know one of the issues that sometimes people who are not on a plant-based or vegetarian diet will have issues with is inflammation. And I've seen there's a couple of studies around vegetarian diet and lowering that inflammation, and that can then positively affect things like mental health.
Well, that's a big issue. I think there's a couple of areas that I think needs more investigation. And particularly it's in these areas. Number one is the role of microbiome in neurochemical imbalances or neurochemical optimization. And I think there's enough evidence to demonstrate that meat-based diets may have some deficiencies in neurochemical production or the feeding of quote unquote bad bacteria, which produce a variety of anxiety producing neurochemicals in the body that I think are detrimental to the health of people, particularly if they have predispositions for that. Mm-hmm. I also think there's some components in the vegetarian diet, if they're not addressing essential fatty acid components, that can be very debilitating for mental health and learning and IQ and stuff, which is well evidenced. So I think there's positives and negatives on both sides. And as opposed to being married to kind of dietary tribalism, I'm advocating is, well, what can we learn from animals? I'm not convinced that animal fat is required in order for optimal brain functioning, since most animal fat is cooked, and cooking creates rancid fats, and rancid fats, in my opinion, are not advantageous to the diet on any level.
What are rancid fats? Can you say more about that?
Fats that have been heated to a temperature where the natural state of them has been damaged. Uh-huh. So, for example, in the case of fish oils, is a common element for omega-3s and things that people are looking for. Well, if you're searing your salmon on the barbecue and adding, carcinogenic burning of it and the damaging of fats, we're very heat sensitive. I don't see where the connection where that's going to be advantageous. So I think there's a lot of biases based inside the science as well. I think to apply specifically to the individual, and I encourage people to get out of the tribalism, get some testing with an open-minded professional who isn't attached to being a meat eater or a vegetarian or a paleo or whatever, that's just looking at, well, here's what your science says. Here's what your markers, here's your B12 levels, here's your essential fatty acid levels, here's what your hormone levels are. Look, let's address it this way, that way. We'll take into account what you would like to do, or your intentions behind it, or your generalizations. Mm-hmm. Let's offset that with a little bit of testing individually and get things dialed in for you so you can get the real objective, which is to live long and live strong.
Yeah, I think it's so difficult to so many of these things in relation to diet and scientific studies are definitely complicated. And when you're a lay person trying to understand what is it that I can do to optimize my physical health, my mental health, all of these things, I feel like and I'm probably guilty of this on some level too, what the easiest thing to do is to just Google something and then read up a little bit about it. And then I think you get these generalities like that you're speaking about, which may or may not apply to you specifically. I was speaking with somebody the other day who was telling me about how specifically for anxiety, she recommends that you do hair follicle testing, which will give you that specific to you result, and then you can tailor what it is you're doing based on that, rather than, as you're saying, taking these kind of big general concepts and just sort of ascribing to them somewhat randomly, potentially.
There's two things to that too, and I think the more tests that a person does, which could kind of expose confirmation through trends in your testing results. So if you can run a hair analysis, a hormone test, a heavy metal test, right, some blood work, overlaid a genetic and someone who can determine epigenetics and see your mutations, and then followed with a gut map, and staying within a relative uniform dietary process over an extended period of time, you're going to get really accurate results. In regards to Google searching, and I would suggest people do this. Do a Google search and then take the exact same search parameters and plug them into DuckDuckGo. And you're going to see completely different sets of data.
Okay, interesting. So in essence, to avoid going down that sort of, political, potentially rabbit hole of all of these things that you can get wrapped up in, it's more advantageous to you as an individual to seek someone out locally and get your own numbers run and then figure out a treatment plan from there. I want to talk to you too, I think specifically about magnesium, because I know that that's something that is really important for, obviously, for sleep is something that we know for sure. Speaking of studies, there were two studies that I found about magnesium. One was in 2010, one was in 2017, that showed that it can be effective for reducing anxiety. But the studies, of course, are self-reporting and there's no control trials. But what we do know, I think we can say at this point about magnesium, is that it plays an important role in regulating neurotransmitters, which obviously are related to things like anxiety, depression. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm very fascinated by this. And a number of years ago, I ran into a bunch of problems, particularly because I was working, 12, 14 hours a day for 2 years straight without a break, and relying on stimulants, central nervous stimulants, in order to maintain my productivity throughout that time, as well as my fitness regimen.
Like caffeine, et cetera,
Yeah,
that kind of
caffeine
stuff?
and things like that, right? So
Okay.
in excessive amounts, I think that were, stimulatory. And of course,
a lot of Americans are doing that.
yeah, and there's susceptibility with them among genetics about nervous system overload for certain, as well as I think the cortisol production, which can have significant impact on your microbiome and how that works. And your microbiome produces a great amount of the neurotransmitters that your body requires, particularly serotonin, which is the kind of the feel good.
Right. And cortisol being that stress hormone that, if people aren't familiar with. Yep. Okay.
So where I think there's two very important interactions is, number one, how do you get to the rest and relax zone more frequently? Because that's more conducive to extracting the essential vitamins, minerals, nutrients, amino acids, essential fatty acids that the bacteria are going to use to manufacture these neurochemicals. Number two is, if you're in that high cortisol level, there is a shift within the microbiome response, and that there's a more proliferation of the bacteria that will lead to the production of neurochemical stressors, which will lead to a higher likelihood of, anxiety, paranoia, these type of things, which plague a lot of the population. And then inadvertently, a lot of people will self-medicate through, a variety of substances, whether that's prescribed or recreational use things in order to deal with that, which oftentimes can lead to shifts in dietary habits. And most of those dietary habits will be an increased consumption of sugars. Sure. So one of the things that I've noticed, particularly because I deal with a lot of people that have this as an issue, is you'll see a period of situation will come into life. Great example is the last year and a half. That's a high stress anxiety situation, and people will try to stimulate them of exposure to blue light, electromagnetic radiation. They're online trying to figure this out. What do I need to do? Blah, 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 blah. I got to check out what's happening on the latest COVID numbers or whatever it happens to be. So there's an anxiety that's built into the model, and exposure to blue light, which doesn't cause the rest relaxation response. And then one will start to self-medicate for the anxiety. Maybe they're using cannabis products, for example. Their appetite goes up and they start consuming, high corn fructose sugar, which feeds the bad guys, which are producing indole and skadol. And then they're waking up in panic attacks and all this sort of stuff. And they go to their doctor. Here's what's happened. They get another prescription. The prescription causes further dysbiosis. And now you're on a freight train to hell because of, hey, guess what? You've just overclocked your nervous system. So the suggestions are, when you start increasing in doses of magnesium, which has relaxation response in the body, both from a neuromuscular level, as well as it helps produce the neurochemicals like serotonin. It's a precursor mineral that's involved. It's deficient in almost every diet. Sugar also causes a drop in magnesium. In other words, you burn more magnesium. Electromagnetic frequencies cause an increase in the demand for magnesium, as well as increases in enzymatic activity or productivity due to either changes in health, changes in lifestyle, or excessive work or physical activity. And so I was shocked when I was able to add magnesium into my diet. And I learned this from a guy by the name of Charles Poliquin, who was using magnesium with Olympic athletes. He trained gold medalists in 27 different Olympic sports and the who's who of pro sports. And he was using high dosages of magnesium to offset the stress response from intensive Olympic athlete type training. And he also was the first guy to make the connection between Chinese medicine and neurochemical dominance inside the body. And so that's one of the things that he used, magnesium and a lot of essential fatty acids and L-carnitine in combination to enhance fat metabolism, nervous system recovery, and overall sense of well-being in hard training athletes who are testing themselves to the limit. Well, a person who is predisposed to neurochemical imbalances or anxieties and things like that, they are in that same kind of fight or flight extensive mode that an Olympic athlete would be. And so you can learn from, just like, the brakes on your car are a result of IndyCar drivers driving around the track at 200 miles an hour. Well, we can take that same high stress environments in athletic endeavor and apply it into our own lives and start to reap positive results. And that's what we were able to do. And it's one of the reasons why our full spectrum magnesium has been one of the best selling products in our company history, because a tremendous amount of people are finding relief from those things which are driving them to either abuse recreational substances or become overly dependent on pharmaceutical intervention. And they want other options. And I think this is a way to certainly support people living a healthier life without an over dependence on those two areas.
Yeah, one of the things that I found so fascinating about, and I'm sure we'll probably get into this a little bit as well, was sort of the gut-brain connection. And I was looking into this early on in my own sort of trying to figure out what makes the most sense for me and my diet, and changing some things and not eating meat anymore and all that kind of stuff. The biome itself craves what you put into it. So if you're putting in Doritos, then it's going to, after a while, be like, where are my Doritos? Which a lot of people understand is you get that kind of craving for a fast food, high, trans fat foods or salt. But it also applies to if you're putting in salad, so that it will eventually be like, where is my salad? I really want that, which then that gets transmitted to your brain itself, and you find yourself actually craving what it is that is better for you in the first place, which I was really encouraged by, because if you go into some of these things and there's like a denial that a lot of people are doing, that I'm going to push this stuff that's really tempting off to the side, and I'm going to only have what's quote unquote good for me, and that's so difficult. But you can really get to a place where you actually are looking forward to that stuff and wanting that stuff.
Yeah, and usually there's about a 3-week period of acclimatization to a new diet where your microbiome shifts enough where you'll actually start craving the foods that are good for you and not suffering the cravings of the things that aren't so good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's usually other periods of 3 months, 6, and a year in where there's deeper levels of integration into that dietary practice, and assuming that you've kind of monitored those adjustments and addressed the deficiencies which are in any diet, and augmented the advantages. That's where I see people who find a dietary practice that is balanced by proper supplementation and accurate, regular biofeedback, which correlates with the data that they do in their testing. And that's where people, I find, whatever diet they choose, if they go down that route, the likelihood that they are going to become successful and find something that really works for their health in the long term is exceptionally high. And if they don't do it, the likelihood of adherence to that for a long time is exceptionally low. So I think the evidence, I've seen enough clinical work for the last 30 years that seems to be the process that seems most effective in dietary choice.
Yeah, it's a momentum, I suppose, too, that builds. And I do think part of that is psychological as well. In addition to you kind of get rolling on something and you start to feel good about it. You start to potentially see some results. And it certainly, as you know, applies to sort of athletic endeavors in general. Once you kind of get rolling past that first step or few steps, it just becomes definitely easier. I have two questions actually about magnesium. One is, are there any side effects that people should know about or be concerned about dosage wise? And then the second one, is it something that could potentially be part of children's diet?
Yeah. Well, the evidence is showing that 80% of the North Americans in society are deficient in magnesium because it's been largely in part stripped from our soil. The other thing is we have a high calcium-based diet, and they exist in a 2-to-1 ratio. So if your calcium's up and your magnesium's low, you start dumping calcium, which is not good for things like bone strength, as well as a variety of other conditions inside the body as well, and also for the relaxation response, in particular in musculature. So that's an overarching piece. As far as side effects from magnesium, the most common side effects that can happen for people is in high dosages, you get the runs, particularly if it's a high citrate based magnesium, which draws more water into the intestines. There's all different types of magnesium. We have 7 in our brand to accommodate all of the beneficial components that magnesium is uptake in the body while minimizing the deficiencies. So a little bit of citrate, particularly people who are having trouble with constipation, oftentimes is good, but too much of it can give you the runs.
Okay.
Second thing is there is about 1% of the population that, because of the vasodilation effect of magnesium, in other words, it opens up arteries more so, you get more blood flow. There may be adjustment periods, particularly if they have undigested proteins going into brains, that can cause inflammatory response. It's usually the other way around, but some people who may be highly putrefied coming out of some dietary stuff or have some digestive issues going on may see an increase of negative symptoms like headache or feeling funny for a few days. It usually regulates out, but anything that happens extensively, watch. And so what we suggest people is they start on a low dosage, 1 to 2 caps 3 times a day, and then increase by 1 to 2 caps a day until you get the runs. And then you dial back down. So let's say you get the runs at 4 grams, you dial back down to maybe 3, stay at 3 till you get the runs again. That means you hit saturation, and you dial it back down to 2. This is a way you can fill up your entire magnesium reserves, get all the benefits, and then eventually you just titrate down to a maintenance dosage. It was developed by orthomolecular nutritionists, Dr. Abram Hoffer, Dr. David Hawkins, and Dr. Linus Pauling back in the 70s, treating all sorts of psychiatric conditions with nutritional supplementation. And anyone who is suffering from a variety of psychological or psychiatric conditions to nutritional imbalances in the body, I would strongly recommend that they find an orthomolecular psychologist or nutritionist with experience with the role of nutrition in psychology, because there is some very good testing and some very specific clinical experience that they'll be able to help. And I've seen absolute radical transformations where conventional medicine science couldn't get anywhere with people with severe mental disorders. And within months, by addressing the variants in their nutritional deficiencies, we saw major shifts in that. So definitely look at orthomolecular psychiatry and orthomolecular nutrition. Go down there, see if you can find some practitioners who have been trained under Abram Hoffer's methodologies. There is a whole group that meets of orthomolecular psychiatrists in particular around the world. And so even in extreme conditions, they may find relief through using what quote unquote would be considered unconventional but nutritionally sound ideologies. And I think for people suffering, I think it behooves me that a lot of common science or proposed science in the world will poo-poo these avenues when maybe that individual has exhausted all of the resources in that area. I think we should be encouraging those individuals to seek out some of these more alternative ideologies or nutritional programs that are not necessarily recognized or supported by the pharmaceutical industrial complex, but may actually provide the relief that that individual needs and that concordant family may be looking for. And I think you want to explore every avenue that you can. And I believe it's the responsible choice of all of us to advocate for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't really know why it is that there seems to be this bias towards particular kinds of treatment for, I mean, certainly psychiatric conditions, as you're talking about, but maybe even just more generally, any kind of even physical issue that people might be having. The example that came into my mind as you were talking was something like ADHD, where if for so long it was, okay, well, we're going to do stimulants. And not that that doesn't work for people who have ADHD, because it does. But it's only recently, I feel like in the last maybe 5 years or so, that there's these alternate treatments that people are looking at, because they've gotten to that point that you're describing, where it's like, we've tried all this other stuff that we're supposed to be trying, that our doctor has told us or whoever. And maybe that's just sort of the first place that you go, and it's not working. So then we tried diet, and we cut out, red dye in so and so's diet, and it made a huge difference. So I don't really know where that comes from. I mean, and maybe it's kind of, as you were speaking earlier about there are these biases which kind of exist in a more macro level in a culture. But alternative treatments, I mean, especially if you look at something like psychiatric treatments, where we've tried, if you look back in the 50s, we've tried all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, crazy stuff.
Crazy.
And lobotomies.
Right. Magnets used to be something that they tried. And there are even some things that we still do today that we don't even know why they work. They work, but we're not sure why. So we still do them. Electromagnetic shock therapy I think is an example of that. But there are certain things, and I feel like diet and nutrition falls into this category where they're sort of summarily dismissed before really being looked at and given an opportunity. I feel like it's unfortunate.
Well, again, this goes back to what I referred to earlier. And so one of the challenges today of a highly digitally driven, low resolution society is that we're reliant on quote unquote studies, peer-reviewed journals, and then we have, of course, anecdotal or clinical experience. And those are the two versions. And the clinicians will poo-poo the peer-reviewed, and the peer-reviewed will poo-poo the clinicians. Mm-hmm. And this division is largely in part because of what I would say is a competition for the authoritative, definitive response. So people are more interested in advancing their career, their ideology, getting funding for their university project from the powers that be, which they need to kowtow to, rather than actually putting the patient first and applying a systematic experimentation on that individual based on both peer-reviewed and clinical evidence to kind of make that match between data and metadata versus what I'm seeing with the patient in front of me. One of my favorite individuals in that area was a fellow by the name of Dr. David Hawkins, who ran the largest psychiatric practice in North America for over 50 years. And of course, back in those early days, he passed away about 10 years ago. And in the early days, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, we didn't have access to the internet and the metadata and the concordance between all these different universities and challenges and all this stuff. So what was relying is the individual physician had to rely on his own experience and clinician and intuitive cognitive capabilities. What I've seen happen in both big pharma and big tech is a marriage of data that is turning physicians from those who have taken the Hippocratic Oath and are applying critical thinking application to the individual in front of them, to these financially driven models where they only have 5 or 10 minutes with the clinician. They're instantly directed to write a prescription, turn them out the door, run some tests, and send them off to another specialist. And so we have a great amount of hyper specialization with not enough generalization or clinical back, where the empathetic component of the physician is a key factor in the treatment of the individual. So maybe before we were too far in witch doctor land, and then we got into the scientific data point, but now we're not accounting for perverse incentives for creating the next new drug, the amount it takes to bring that to fruition, and why that needs to be implemented with maybe not accurate representation of the detriments of using those pharmaceutical components, and then the overt attack of anybody that suggests that those institutions may be biased in their directions or what they decree. And we had the same thing happen, which gave rise in the Renaissance, where the church had religious overtones and dogmatic ideas, which gave birth to science and the Renaissance. But now we've kind of swung where science has become more of a religion as opposed to a quest for the truth. And so I think we need to rethink, what is the main objective here? Is the objectives to our shareholders' price at the next products, the metadata, and whether I get tenureship at my university, or is it actually, do we spend enough time in dealing with the client and helping them overcome the limitations so that they can live their best and most productive life? I think it's the latter. I think a lot of great physicians are feeling the impact and effects of that. And so for us, the individual, the good news is this: the power is within you, and you are the control levers to determine what, quote unquote, your authoritative figures are to do. They work for you, not the other way around. And I think you want to find that balance to direct your own activities and your own observations and your own experience, and not too quickly defer to authorities, but to be willing and open to experiment with a variety of areas until you find your right mix. And Dr. Hawkins said that there was what he found is, okay, oftentimes you needed a pharmaceutical agent to stabilize the individual that could be treated. Then they would find that they would look at their diets and try and find the nutritional support that might have led to an exacerbation of a predisposition for that. And then the third piece was that you would add an emotional or attitudinal component to that to help that individual recontextualize their condition, their life, or what could be the potential benefits and liabilities of being in a disease state. And he said the likelihood, if you applied all three of those strategies, is that you increase the likelihood dramatically that the person could live a great life.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I remember being terrified as a somewhat neophyte, new clinician, that a lot of this was around managed care coming into the picture. And there was this idea that you can kind of come up with almost a cookie cutter approach to treatment, for which obviously insurance companies love, right? Because it's measurable. You can just kind of sort of prescribe it for people. And there's just not a whole lot of thought necessarily that goes into it. Somebody comes in with X, you give them Y. And I just was terrified of that happening. You sort of turn, clinicians into robots, and
physicians to technicians, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And what I've discovered later was that, and there was a really large, here we're back to studies again, but it is what it is, study around what the most curative aspects of therapy, of psychotherapy were. And it was the relationship between the therapist and the client, that's sort of the bedside manner that you were talking about earlier, which is a lot of times absent. And how can it be there when it's a drive-through 15-minute it, you're in and you're out, that was really what was most important above and beyond whatever techniques were employed, that kind of thing. So I hope that, and I feel like this is true, but that is being recognized more now as what's important. And hopefully that, as you were referencing, we go through these kind of pendulum shifts back and forth throughout history. What I'm looking forward to is a swing back towards people taking care of themselves and getting out and doing things on sort of the heels of a pandemic. When you look back at, the 1918 pandemic, and then you have the Roaring Twenties, that people are going to hopefully come out of this in a better, healthier place than where they are now, because it's certainly a tough spot at the moment.
Yeah, I think the low resolution impact of some of the implementations that were put in place by government agencies certainly did not help people that were suffering from mental health conditions or predisposed for it. And the evidence is starting to mount across the board of the damage that's happened to humans. We are a very highly social species, and the lockdowns and lack of communication and connection, I think, is especially challenging for the old, for people who are on, who that's the big things that they look for in life, and also
who are the most vulnerable too.
Exactly, and for those who are suffering from a variety of psychological conditions, that that touch, that connection, that empathy, empathetic, that love, that is really the non-clinical aspect of the human condition. How do you put love in a test tube? You can't, but you certainly know what it feels like when you're not feeling it, and you certainly know what it feels like when you do. And if you look at to give a little credence to that, if you look at the longitudinal studies of people who live longer, number one, if they have a partner, they tend to live longer. And number two, if they have a pet, they live longer. So a pet oftentimes can provide that sense of connection and love and feeling good, particularly for people who might be predisposed for depression-based things. And so when we interrupt the social condition so dramatically for so long with people, we also reduce exercise. We kept open, pot stores and liquor stores and fast food components, which are all aspects which contribute to the exacerbations of obesity, which is a comorbidity to the condition, to also increase anxiety and the defective effects on neurochemical balance and all this stuff. All those things gave open while, gyms and health food shops were closed. So to me, that seems to fly in the face of what seems reasonable or rational. And, human life is inherently risky. Nobody gets out alive. Nobody gets out without scars. It's, everything that you have is going to decay at some rate. And so one has to balance the risk of life with the benefits of life, and how do I alleviate some of the inevitable suffering that life comes from. And I think if we looked at the more philosophical aspects of the human condition, as opposed to focusing on just the negative headlines that come across the wire every day that evoke so much fear and anxiety, we'd be better able to make policies that would, I think, lead to a much more fulfilling life. And I think we're going to look back on this hopefully 5 or 10 years from now and go, what were we thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's so much opportunity for learning, I think, and that's always inherent in any kind of crisis. I think it's the Chinese symbol for crisis is something like danger and opportunity mixed together at the same time.
Yeah, I use that oftentimes in my lectures, the Kai script that indicates both. And so hopefully we will mine the gold in the mine of discontent.
Well, let's hope so. I want to thank you so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge with everybody. I think there's a lot to be taken away from this. And I hope that people aren't, I think it's, as I was alluding to earlier, it's easy to get overwhelmed by this stuff and to feel like, what do I do? Like there's so many aspects to all these things and potentially complicated terms that I might not understand, but to boil it down, getting yourself tested and understood in your own individual way, and then tailoring things to that seems to be, is that kind of the takeaway message that you want to leave people with?
100%. If you're out there and you're looking, maybe you have a child, you're trying to do everything you can, you know that there's a problem, you're not getting anywhere. What I would encourage you to do, go look up orthomolecular psychiatry, go look at a functional medicine doctor in your area or that is available to you online that can help you provide insight into the testing and has a track record and experience level with your child's condition or your condition. Get these experts in your field to provide insight and a bulwark from your GP or your regular psychologist who may be an expert within a narrow field that doesn't address those issues. So if you've exhausted those areas and you're frustrated child, and probably that's why you're listening to this podcast, there is hope and there is direction, but you need to get the right people in your circle so that you can bolster the invariable resistance you're going to find within your trusted authorities that you might have gone to and have led you to dead ends. And I think it's never too late to find a new solution, and not giving up and being resilient and finding that answer. Oftentimes what leads to is incredible discoveries that not only impact your life, but impacts the lives of many others. And one thing I've noticed in my 30 years in this career is that almost every great breakthrough in this field has come from somebody who has suffered from that condition on an extraordinary level, that didn't give up and found those answers. And so I want to commend and salute you for being a voice out there to provide information and thought experiments for people to consider as they approach mental health. It's something I'm very passionate about. I have a lot of friends throughout the years who have suffered from it excessively, and we've been able to help them live happy and productive lives despite genetic limitations, despite horrific diagnoses, dependency on pharmaceutical intervention. And I think the future is very bright in this field, and you can seek out those experts to help you along the way. And if I can help advocate that, that's my message going forward.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I think that same kind of message, that within that, what feels like suffering or difficulty, that can even be the thing that will propel you forward potentially to find what it is that is going to be helpful for you, maybe, and somewhat in your case, even helpful for many other people. And who knows, maybe you'll make some discovery and find something out that nobody else knew. So thanks again. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much.
All right, that was Wade Lightheart. You can check out some of the products that he mentioned today on magbreakthrough.com. That's MAG breakthrough.com. And of course, as a listener of this podcast, you get a special 10% off code to use at checkout, which is anxiety10. That's magbreakthrough.com. Anxiety 10. A quick reminder to everyone, if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. You can also support the show by checking out our sponsors, Mount Genie and BioOptimizers, and using the code Anxiety10 for 10% off at either one of those places. You can also check out the website, theanxiouschild.com, if you're interested in individual coaching with me or just to support the podcast in general. And as always, I would love, love, love to hear from you. If you are listening to the show and you have any questions or comments, you can get in touch with me via the website or on Instagram at The Anxious Child Podcast. So that's it for today. Until next time, take care and be in touch.
This podcast is not intended as medical or psychological treatment. In no way should it replace treatment from a mental health professional.